They fired the old janitor for being too slow. Then he returned as the company's new owner. The air in the grand boardroom of Thorn Industries hummed with a tension thick enough to cut with a diamond-edged knife, a stark contrast to the usual polished calm that defined the executive floor. Elias Thorn, or rather, the frail, gray-haired man they knew only as Arthur, the too-slow janitor they had unceremoniously dismissed weeks prior, stood at the head of the immense mahogany table. His once slumped shoulders were now straightened with an almost impossible rigidity. His gaze, which had for months appeared vacant and distant, now pierced through the room with the force of a laser beam, stripping away the layers of pretense and revealing the raw nerves beneath. Cashin Croft, the self-assured CEO, and Serafina Vane, the impeccably dressed head of human resources, watched him with a mixture of bewildered amusement and growing irritation, their initial condescension slowly curdling into unease. The security guards, whom Cashin had just summoned with a dismissive flick of his wrist, stood poised by the double doors, their presence a silent, menacing promise to escort the unwelcome intruder out. Elias noted their readiness, a flicker of satisfaction deep within him. All the players were in place. "This is highly irregular, Arthur," Cashin stated, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, a carefully constructed mask of control. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, a custom piece Elias himself had designed years ago, crossing his arms over his expensive suit jacket, the fabric pulling taut across his chest. The disdain in his posture was almost a physical presence. "We appreciate your enthusiasm for our corporate values, but this is a private board meeting. Perhaps you've forgotten your way back to the employee exit." His tone dripped with patronizing politeness, a veneer barely concealing his contempt, a contempt Elias had seen directed at countless others during his time as Arthur. Serafina, beside him, let out a delicate, disdainful sniff, a sound calculated to convey utter disgust. She adjusted her designer glasses, the cold glint of the lenses matching her eyes, which swept over Elias's simple, ill-fitting clothes, lingering on the worn fabric as if it were an affront to her meticulously curated aesthetic. Elias, however, did not flinch. The casual cruelty of their words, so familiar to his Arthur persona, no longer registered as a personal affront, but as a confirmation of their moral rot. He merely offered a small, knowing smile that did not quite reach his eyes, a smile that spoke of secrets held and battles already won. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Croft, Ms. Vane," he began, his voice, previously a reedy murmur barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning, now resonated with an unexpected depth and authority that silenced the room more effectively than any raised voice could have. The casual ease with which he wielded his words, the sudden command in his tone, caught them off guard. "I haven't forgotten a thing. In fact, I remember everything. Every slight, every dismissive glance, every cruel word spoken in the hallowed halls of my company." He paused, letting the last two words hang in the stunned silence, allowing their full weight to settle. Cashin's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then a dawning incomprehension. Serafina's perfect composure seemed to crack, a faint frown marring her otherwise unblemished forehead, a tiny ripple in her carefully constructed facade. "Your company?" Serafina finally scoffed, a nervous edge entering her voice, betraying her carefully cultivated cool. Her manicured hand, adorned with a large emerald ring, rose to dismiss his claim. "Arthur, are you quite well? Perhaps the stress of unemployment has affected your memory. This is Thorn Industries, a global conglomerate, certainly not the purview of a former janitor." She gestured dismissively with that hand, as if swatting away a fly, a gesture Elias had seen her use against anyone she deemed beneath her. The guards, sensing the shifting dynamic, took a tentative step forward, their eyes on Cashin, awaiting his command, their own confusion evident. A low chuckle escaped Elias's lips, a sound rich with irony and a hint of something dangerous, something utterly unlike the meek Arthur. It was the sound of a predator, long dormant, finally revealing its true nature. "Oh, but it is, Ms. Vane. More than you could possibly imagine. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn jacket, the same jacket he had worn every day as Arthur, pulling out a small, unassuming key. He held it up, allowing the faint boardroom lights to catch its gleam, a mundane object imbued with extraordinary significance. You see, this is the key to the private executive washroom, a place I was never supposed to enter, except to clean. But it's also a key to something far more significant. His eyes, now sharp and alert, swept over Cassian and Serafina, lingering for a moment on the subtle fear beginning to bloom in their faces, replacing their initial amusement. The game, as they say, is over. And I assure you, neither of you will be smiling for much longer. The air thickened further, charged with an unspoken threat, a palpable shift in power. The once mocking gazes of Cassian and Serafina were now replaced by a chilling realization that perhaps, just perhaps, they had underestimated the old man in front of them. The question wasn't if he was crazy, but what terrifying truth lay behind his words, a truth that was about to shatter their carefully constructed world. To understand the astonishing scene unfolding in the Thorn Industries boardroom, one must rewind several months, to a time when Elias Thorn was not the unassuming Arthur, but the reclusive, almost mythical founder of the very empire he now sought to reclaim. Elias Thorn, at 72, was a titan of industry, a man whose vision had forged Thorn Industries from a small manufacturing plant into a global conglomerate. His name had once been synonymous with innovation and integrity, a beacon in the often cutthroat world of corporate America. Yet, for years, he had lived a life of quiet retirement, delegating the day-to-day operations to a hand-picked succession team, led by his protege, Cassian Croft. Elias had always believed in nurturing talent, in fostering a company culture that valued innovation, loyalty, and, crucially, humanity. He prided himself on creating a workplace where employees felt respected, where their contributions, regardless of their position, from the lowest janitor to the highest executive, were acknowledged and celebrated. He had instituted generous profit-sharing programs, comprehensive healthcare, and educational subsidies for employees' children. Thorn Industries wasn't just a business. It was a community, a family, built on mutual respect. However, from his secluded estate, a sprawling property nestled amidst ancient oaks and rolling hills, whispers of change began to reach him. Reports, initially subtle, then increasingly overt, painted a disturbing picture. Profits were soaring, yes, but at what cost? Employee satisfaction surveys plummeted, the numbers stark and undeniable. There were stories of aggressive cost-cutting measures, of experienced, older employees being eased out under the guise of efficiency drives, their years of dedication disregarded, their institutional knowledge summarily dismissed. A pervasive sense of fear and insecurity had begun to replace the old atmosphere of camaraderie and shared purpose. This was a general shift towards a cold, metrics-driven environment, where human beings were reduced to data points on a spreadsheet. Cassian Croft, the ambitious young man Elias had once mentored, the one he had seen so much potential in, seemed to have fully embraced a ruthless, Darwinian corporate ethos. He had surrounded himself with like-minded individuals, chief among them Serafina Vane, a woman whose intelligence was matched only by her icy pragmatism. She believed, unequivocally, that human resources were merely resources to be optimized, exploited, or discarded with as much emotion as one might allocate raw materials. Elias tried to intervene, gently at first, through proxies and quiet inquiries. His calls to Cassian were met with polished assurances that all was well, that these were simply necessary adjustments for a competitive global market. "We're just trimming the fat, Elias," Cassian would say, his voice smooth as silk, a practiced tone of respect that rang hollow to Elias's ears, making the company leaner, more agile. "You taught me to always look for efficiency, didn't you?" The irony was not lost on Elias. He had taught efficiency in production, in process, in resource allocation, never at the expense of human dignity, never by sacrificing the very people who built the company. He had always distinguished between necessary fiscal prudence and callous disregard for human worth. His frustration mounted, a slow-burning fire in his gut. He saw his legacy, the very soul of Thorn Industries, being slowly eroded, replaced by a soulless machine driven solely by quarterly reports, by the insatiable appetite for ever-increasing profits. He remembered the faces of the early employees, the families he had helped build, the communities he had supported with the company's success. This new Thorn Industries, with its cutthroat atmosphere, its pervasive anxiety, was a betrayal of everything he stood for. He felt a profound sense of disillusionment, a deep disappointment in those he had entrusted with his life's work. How could he truly know what was happening behind the gleaming facades of his corporate headquarters if he remained in his ivory tower, shielded by layers of management and sanitized reports? He needed to see it, feel it, experience it firsthand. He needed to become invisible. The idea, audacious and perhaps a little mad, had come to him one sleepless night as he stared at the ceiling of his grand bedroom, the silence of his estate amplifying his anxieties. He would go undercover. He would strip away his identity, his wealth, his power, and become one of the very people being systematically marginalized, an elderly, seemingly insignificant employee. A janitor. It was perfect. A janitor had access everywhere, saw everything, yet was rarely seen, rarely truly acknowledged. They were the ghosts of the corporate world, observing without being observed. He could move through the offices, the break rooms, even the executive suites, witnessing the true character of his company, not through polished reports, but through the unfiltered reality of daily interactions, through the casual slights and the overheard conversations. He needed to test the very core of the values he believed he had instilled. He needed to find out if there was any humanity left, and more importantly, who still possessed it. He had chosen the name Arthur for its unassuming quality, a name that evoked a sense of quiet reliability, easily forgotten. His transformation was meticulous, an exercise in self-erasure. Elias, a man known for his sharp suits, his commanding presence, his resonant voice, began to cultivate the persona of Arthur, a slow, slightly forgetful, elderly man with a gentle demeanor and a penchant for rambling stories. He exchanged his tailored clothes for ill-fitting overalls, purchased from a discount store, his polished Italian leather shoes for worn-out, heavy work boots that scuffed rather than clicked. He practiced a shuffling gait, a slight tremor in his hands, and perfected a faraway look in his eyes that suggested mild confusion. He even had his considerable network arrange a false background, complete with a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood and a fabricated history of a quiet life, just enough to pass basic HR checks without raising undue suspicion. It felt like shedding a skin, an uncomfortable but necessary metamorphosis. His plan was not merely about observation, it was a profound test. He believed that true character revealed itself not in how one treated their superiors, or those who could advance their career, but in how they treated those they perceived as inferior, those who could offer them no immediate benefit, no social currency. He wanted to see if the compassion he so valued, the empathy he had tried to weave into the very fabric of Thorn Industries, still existed within the company's walls, or if ambition had truly consumed everything, leaving only a hollow shell. He wanted to know if he had built a monument to human ingenuity or a temple to corporate greed. And so, with a heavy heart, but a determined spirit, Elias Thorn, the legendary industrialist, vanished, and Arthur, the aging janitor, walked through the employee entrance of Thorn Industries, ready to witness the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. The initial weeks of Elias's undercover operation as Arthur were a slow, painful descent into the reality he had feared. The corporate headquarters, once a symbol of innovation and collaborative spirit, now felt like a sterile, unforgiving machine, a gleaming monument to a cold, efficient logic. Arthur, armed with his mop and bucket, moved through its gleaming corridors, a ghost in plain sight. He observed, he listened, and the truth, unvarnished and brutal, began to unfold before his eyes, confirming his worst suspicions. His first direct encounter with Cashencroft as Arthur was chillingly instructive. Arthur had been diligently cleaning the executive floor late one evening, meticulously wiping down the glass walls of Cashin's office. Cashin, emerging from a late meeting, a triumphant smirk on his face, spotted him. "Arthur, isn't it?" he had said, his voice flat, devoid of any genuine curiosity or warmth. "You're new here, aren't you? Try to keep up. We have a standard of efficiency, even for our cleaning staff. And please, don't make eye contact. It's distracting." He hadn't even waited for a response, merely striding past, leaving a faint trail of expensive cologne and a palpable sense of disdain, as if Arthur were merely a piece of furniture to be ignored. Arthur, however, had met his gaze for a fleeting second, a flicker of the old Elias Thorne in his eyes, a silent assessment that Cashin, consumed by his own self-importance, had entirely missed. The founder's eyes had seen the hollow core of his protégé. Serafina Vane proved even more overtly hostile. Her office, perpetually immaculate, was a fortress of efficiency, every pen aligned, every document filed. She was known for her productivity audits, which disproportionately targeted older employees, meticulously documenting their perceived shortcomings. One afternoon, Arthur was struggling to maneuver a heavy cleaning cart around a tight corner near Serafina's office. His aged hands fumbled with the worn wheels. He bumped into a large potted plant, an exotic, expensive specimen, nearly knocking it over. Serafina emerged instantly, her face a mask of annoyance, her voice a whip crack. "Arthur, for heaven's sake, are you blind? That plant cost the company a fortune. Do you have any idea how much resources are wasted on employees who can't even manage basic tasks?" Her voice was sharp, cutting, devoid of any empathy. "Perhaps we need to reevaluate the utility of our older staff. Your generation, Arthur, seems to struggle with the pace of modern business." She didn't wait for an apology, simply walked away, her heels clicking crisply down the hall, leaving Arthur to slowly right the plant, his heart aching with the casual cruelty of her words. He had built this company. He had created the very wealth that purchased that plant. Yet, in her eyes, he was just a burden, a drain on her meticulously optimized system. He witnessed other similar interactions, not just directed at him, but at other older employees. He saw them being subtly sidelined, their decades of experience dismissed, their voices unheard. The efficiency drive was a thinly veiled campaign to replace seasoned, higher-paid staff with younger, cheaper alternatives, regardless of the institutional knowledge lost, the mentorship foregone, or the human cost. The cafeteria conversations he overheard were filled with whispers of forced early retirements, of impossible performance targets, and a pervasive fear of being next. The humanity he had strived to embed in Thorne Industries had been systematically purged, leaving behind a cold, calculating machine. He saw men and women who had dedicated their lives to his company reduced to anxious shadows, their spirits crushed. Amidst this landscape of cold ambition, however, a single, unexpected beacon of warmth began to emerge. Her name was Cora Willow, an administrative assistant in the marketing department. Cora was young, perhaps in her late 20s, burdened by a demanding job and, as Arthur would later learn from his subtle observations, struggling with personal financial difficulties and a sick grandmother. She often ate her lunch alone, a simple sandwich, her eyes sometimes shadowed with worry, but her spirit seemed untouched by the cynicism that permeated the office. Yet, despite her own burdens, Cora possessed a remarkable wellspring of kindness. Their first meaningful interaction occurred when Arthur was struggling to open a stubborn supply closet door. His aged hands fumbled with the key, the tremor he cultivated for Arthur's persona becoming unexpectedly real with frustration. Cora, passing by, noticed his predicament. "Here, let me help you with that, Arthur," she offered, her voice gentle, completely devoid of the usual corporate brusqueness. She effortlessly jiggled the key, her touch light and precise, and the door clicked open. "There you go," she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to momentarily illuminate the sterile hallway, making it feel less cold. "Sometimes these old locks need a little persuasion." She didn't rush away. Instead, she paused. "Are you having a good day, Arthur?" she asked. A simple question that no one else had bothered to ask him in weeks. A question that cut through his disguise and touched a deeper part of him. Arthur, taken aback by her genuine concern, mumbled something about it being fine, surprised by the unexpected warmth. From then on, Cora became a quiet, consistent source of decency. She would often leave a small, wrapped cookie or a piece of fruit on the cleaning cart, a silent gesture of care, a small act of rebellion against the prevailing indifference. "For your break, Arthur," she'd say softly, avoiding making a big deal out of it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She never seemed to mind if he was a bit slow, never rushed him, even when her own workload was clearly overwhelming. One particularly busy morning, he was dusting the photo frames on a shelf near her desk. He paused, looking at a picture of a smiling young woman, presumably Cora, with an older woman. "That's my grandmother," Cora explained, noticing his gaze, a hint of tenderness in her voice. "She's not doing so well these days. It's just us, you know." Her voice held a hint of sadness, a quiet admission of her own struggles, a vulnerability that was rare in this corporate jungle. Arthur, in his old man persona, would occasionally ramble, sharing fabricated anecdotes about his grandchildren or the good old days of a bygone era. Most employees would politely nod, their eyes glazed over, then quickly move on, eager to escape the rambling old man. Cora, however, would listen. She would genuinely engage, asking follow-up questions, her eyes reflecting true interest, as if his stories were the most fascinating tales she had ever heard. "That sounds like a wonderful memory, Arthur," she'd say, or, "Oh, your granddaughter sounds just like my niece." She saw him, truly saw him, not as an invisible janitor, a cleaning robot, but as a person with a history, with feelings, with a soul. He often watched her interactions with others, too. He saw her patiently explain things to confused colleagues, offer to help someone struggling with a task, or simply lend a sympathetic ear to a colleague facing a difficult personal issue. She was the antithesis of the cold, calculating individuals who now populated the executive ranks, a quiet force of goodness. One day, Arthur overheard a particularly nasty exchange between Serafina and a veteran administrative assistant named Gerald, who was close to retirement. Serafina, in a loud, condescending voice, berated Gerald for a minor formatting error in a report, implying he was senile and suggesting he consider early retirement options, with a barely concealed sneer. Gerald, his face flushed with humiliation, his shoulders slumped, simply nodded, defeated. Later, Arthur found him in the break room, staring blankly into a lukewarm cup of coffee, his spirit visibly broken. Cora approached him quietly, sat beside him, and without a word, placed a small, comforting hand on his arm, a gesture that spoke volumes. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She just sat there, a silent anchor of empathy, allowing him to feel seen. Arthur, observing from the shadows of a supply closet, felt a fierce surge of protective anger. This was the culture Cashin and Serafina had fostered, a culture that crushed the spirit and discarded loyalty without a second thought. And Cora, struggling herself, illuminated the profound absence of those values in the leadership by embodying them so effortlessly, one small act of kindness at a time. These daily interactions, these stark contrasts between the prevailing cruelty and Cora's quiet compassion, solidified Elias's resolve. He had come seeking a truth, and he had found it. Cashin and Serafina were not merely misguided or overly ambitious. They were fundamentally devoid of the values that made a company truly great, values that made life worth living. They saw only numbers, not human beings, only profit, not purpose. And Cora, struggling herself, illuminated the profound absence of those values in the leadership by embodying them so effortlessly. Elias knew, with absolute certainty, who deserved to stay and who had to be removed. The test was complete. The time for Arthur to disappear and Elias Thorne to re-emerge was imminent. The day of the annual shareholder meeting arrived, a grand affair where the year's corporate triumphs were celebrated and future strategies unveiled. It was a meticulously choreographed event, designed to project an image of unparalleled success and visionary leadership, a spectacle of power and wealth. The company's opulent auditorium, usually reserved for large-scale product launches, was filled to capacity with shareholders, media, and key employees. Cashincroft, radiant in his bespoke suit, a picture of corporate confidence, stood at the podium, delivering a rousing speech about record profits and aggressive expansion, his voice booming with practiced authority. Serafina Vane, seated in the front row, a triumphant smile fixed on her lips, beamed approvingly, a silent testament to her role in the efficiency that had driven these numbers, her eyes periodically sweeping the audience, basking in the reflected glory. Just as Cashin was reaching the crescendo of his address, proclaiming a new era of unprecedented growth and global dominance, a ripple of confusion spread through the audience. A hush fell, quickly followed by murmurs. The heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium, usually locked during presentations, swung open silently, revealing the bright sunlight outside. All eyes turned, drawn by the unexpected interruption. A sleek, black limousine, an ultra-luxury model rarely seen outside of celebrity entourages, purred to a stop directly outside the auditorium's main entrance, visible through the large glass panels that formed the building's facade. Its engine was almost silent, a symbol of quiet, immense power. From its depths emerged not one, but two figures. The first was an impeccably dressed man, clearly a high-powered attorney, carrying a thick leather brief, his expression grave. The second figure, however, was what caused the collective gasp, a sound that reverberated through the hall. It was Elias Thorne, not Arthur, the shuffling, stooped janitor, but Elias Thorne, the legend, the very architect of the empire they now sat in. His silver hair was meticulously coiffed, no longer disheveled and sparse. He wore a perfectly tailored suit of dark charcoal gray, its fabric whispering of understated luxury, a stark contrast to the worn overalls of Arthur. His posture was ramrod straight, radiating an aura of formidable power that had been carefully hidden for months. His eyes, no longer clouded by feigned senility or a faraway gaze, blazed with an intelligent, almost fierce intensity that pierced through the hushed hall, directly at the stage. Cashin's voice trailed off mid-sentence, the triumphant words dying on his lips. His eyes, initially squinting in disbelief at the figure, widened in horror as recognition dawned, a cold dread washing over him. Serafina, too, felt a cold dread seize her, a sickening lurch in her stomach. Her perfectly composed features dissolved into a mask of shock, her jaw slack, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in an instant. The murmurs began to spread through the audience, a mixture of recognition, confusion, and outright astonishment. "Is that Elias Thorne?" someone whispered, the name carrying an almost mythical weight. "But I thought he was retired and much older." Elias, accompanied by his attorney, walked deliberately down the central aisle, every step echoing with quiet authority, the soft crunch of the plush carpet beneath his expensive shoes a deliberate counterpoint to Arthur's shuffling boots. He did not rush, allowing the weight of his presence to settle upon the room, allowing the shock to permeate every corner. Cashin, pale and trembling, finally found his voice, a pathetic squeak compared to his earlier bravado. "Elias? What is the meaning of this? You're not supposed to be here." His voice cracked, the confident facade crumbling instantly, revealing the terrified man beneath. Elias stopped directly in front of the podium, his gaze fixed on Cashin, then sweeping to include Serafina, who now looked like a statue carved from ice. On the contrary, Cashin, Elias's voice boomed, amplified by the auditorium's acoustics, filling every inch of the vast space. "I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. In my company. At a meeting that, it appears, has been rather mismanaged." He nodded slightly to his attorney, Mr. Davies, who stepped forward, holding up a large, official-looking document, its seal glinting under the lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Davies announced, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence. "I am here today to confirm that as of this moment, Mr. Elias Thorne has officially resumed full, active control as the chairman of the board and chief executive officer of Thorne Industries. All previous appointments, including those of Mr. Cashencroft and Ms. Serafina Vane, are hereby revoked, effective immediately." The words struck like a thunderclap, echoing in the stunned silence. A wave of collective gasps, then a cacophony of whispers and exclamations, swept through the auditorium. Shareholders leaned forward, employees exchanged wide-eyed glances, and the media scrambled for their cameras. Cashin stumbled back from the podium, his face ashen, his mouth agape, utterly defeated. Serafina clutched her chest, her eyes wide with terror, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the raw fear. "Revoked," Cashin stammered, his voice barely a squeak, utterly devoid of its former confidence. But on what grounds? This is preposterous. I have driven profits to unprecedented heights." He gestured wildly at the financial projections on the screen behind him, as if numbers alone could justify everything. Elias stepped forward, his eyes burning into Cashin's, utterly unimpressed by the displayed figures. "On the grounds, Cashin, of moral bankruptcy. On the grounds of dismantling the very soul of this company. On the grounds of betraying the trust one placed in you, and the dignity of the people who built this empire." He paused, his gaze hardening, sweeping over the faces in the audience, many of whom had seen their colleagues dismissed or their own workloads increased to unsustainable levels. "And on the grounds, Mr. Croft, of firing an old man because you deemed him too slow and inefficient. An old man, ironically, who happened to be the founder and true owner of this entire corporation." The revelation landed with the force of a meteor, a seismic shock. "Arthur?" Someone in the audience gasped, a whispered echo that spread like wildfire, incredulity and dawning comprehension on every face. Cashin's eyes darted wildly, piecing together the horrifying puzzle, the sickening realization dawning on him. The old janitor, who he had ridiculed, the burden Serafina had dismissed with such casual cruelty, had been Elias Thorne all along. The ultimate, humiliating irony, a karmic slap in the face. "Yes, Arthur," Elias confirmed, a wry, almost savage smile touching his lips, a look of profound satisfaction. "It seems my disguise was quite effective. Effective enough to reveal the true character of those I entrusted with my legacy. And you, Cashin, and you, Serafina, failed spectacularly." He looked at the two disgraced executives, their faces a mixture of fear, shock, and dawning despair. "You were tested, and you were found wanting. Horribly, utterly wanting." Mr. Davies then gestured towards the security guards who had originally been summoned by Cashin, their expressions now grim with understanding. "These gentlemen will now escort Mr. Croft and Ms. Vane from the premises. They are no longer employees of Thorne Industries and are to be denied all access." The guards, now understanding the true power dynamic, moved quickly, their faces grim, a subtle satisfaction on some of their faces. Cashin, humiliated and utterly defeated, could only offer a weak, incoherent protest as he was led away. His once impeccable suit now seemed to hang limply on his shoulders. Serafina, her face stained with tears of anger and disbelief, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her, followed, head bowed, her silent walk out of the auditorium a stark contrast to her earlier confident strut. Elias Thorne, the founder, the legend, stood alone at the podium, bathed in the silent, awestruck gazes of the assembled shareholders. The mask had fallen, and the true owner had returned, ready to reclaim not just his company, but its very soul. The aftermath of Elias Thorne's dramatic revelation swept through Thorne Industries like a tidal wave, leaving destruction in its wake for some and unexpected blessings for others. The news, fueled by the sheer audacity of Elias's undercover operation and the public humiliation of Cashin and Serafina, exploded across business news channels and social media. It was the story of the decade, A corporate fable come to life. A cautionary tale of hubris. Hashtags like hashtag Janitor CEO and hashtag Thorn Reborn trended for days. For Cashencroft, the downfall was swift and absolute. Stripped of his CEO title, his company credit cards immediately canceled, and his access badges deactivated. He was literally walked out of the Thorn Industries building by the very security he had once commanded, his face a mask of bitter disbelief. The multi-million-dollar severance package he had meticulously negotiated was nullified by a broad clause in his contract pertaining to gross negligence and moral turpitude, a clause Elias had insisted on inserting years ago, anticipating such a need, a testament to his foresight. His carefully cultivated reputation as a business prodigy evaporated overnight. The financial world, which had once lauded his aggressive strategies, now viewed him as a pariah, his name synonymous with betrayal and short-sighted greed. His lavish penthouse apartment, purchased with company funds and perks, was reclaimed. His luxury car, a company lease, was repossessed. His phone rang incessantly with calls from furious investors, former board members distancing themselves, and the media hounding him for comments. He found himself not only jobless and reputationally ruined, but also facing multiple lawsuits from shareholders for mismanagement and potential fraud related to his efficiency drives that had actually destabilized core departments by gutting experienced staff. His arrogance had blinded him, and now he had nothing but the bitter taste of public scorn and the crushing weight of his own failures. Cashin, who had so gleefully trimmed the fat of others, was now the one being cut, brutally and without mercy, a victim of his own ruthless philosophy. Serafina Vane's collapse was equally spectacular, if not more emotionally devastating for her. Her career, built on ruthless ambition and a calculated disregard for human sentiment, was utterly destroyed. The HR world, often a tight-knit community, blacklisted her immediately. No company, especially one with an eye on public perception, would touch an individual who had so openly embraced and executed such heartless policies, especially under the glare of this scandal. Her carefully constructed public image as a fierce advocate for modern workplace solutions shattered, revealing the callous pragmatist beneath. Her personal relationships, many of which were purely transactional, dissolved as quickly as her professional standing. She lost her prestigious apartment, her elite social circle, and the future she had so meticulously planned, now an empty void. The woman who had lectured Arthur on efficiency and utility now found herself utterly useless, discarded by the very system she championed, a bitter pill to swallow. Her humiliation was amplified by the fact that she, the supposed expert in human behavior, had been so thoroughly fooled by the old man she so readily dismissed, his true identity a mockery of her own supposed insights. She ended up selling off most of her assets just to cover legal fees and basic living expenses, a shadow of the powerful woman she once was. Meanwhile, in the midst of this corporate earthquake, Cora Willow found herself in a state of profound shock. She had watched Elias Thorne's reveal from her office, her face pale with disbelief, tears welling in her eyes. The Arthur she had offered cookies and listened to was the legendary founder of Thorn Industries. The implications were staggering, almost too much to comprehend. She feared the worst, that her small acts of kindness would be seen as an attempt to curry favor, that she too might be swept up in the inevitable purge, losing the only stability she had. The morning after the reveal, Cora arrived at work, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and bewildered hope. She found an invitation awaiting her on her desk, a summons to Elias Thorne's newly reoccupied executive office, a place of power and mystique she had never imagined setting foot in. Trembling, she made her way to the top floor, the polished corridors seeming even grander and more intimidating now. Elias sat behind his grand mahogany desk, looking every inch the powerful industrialist he was, yet his eyes held a familiar warmth. He greeted her with a warm, genuine smile, the same gentle smile Arthur had sometimes offered. "Cora," Elias began, his voice kind, a soothing balm to her anxiety. "Please sit." She perched hesitantly on the edge of the plush chair opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You must be wondering why I've asked you here." Cora could only nod, her throat tight with emotion, unable to form words. "During my time as Arthur," he continued, his gaze steady and sincere, "I observed a great deal. I saw the worst of human nature, the greed and the callousness, and I saw the best. You, Cora, were unequivocally the best." He recounted specific moments, not in a way that felt like a test, but as a genuine recounting of impactful memories. The stubborn supply closet door, the quiet cookies left on his cart, her willingness to listen to his rambling stories, her silent comfort to Gerald. "You treated me, a man you believed to be an insignificant janitor, with more respect, kindness, and genuine empathy than anyone else in this entire building. You did so without expectation, without knowing who I truly was, simply because it was the right thing to do. That is a rare and precious quality, Cora." Cora's eyes welled up with tears, a mix of relief, gratitude, and overwhelming humility. She had never expected recognition for simply being decent, for following the quiet promptings of her own heart. I just try to be kind, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice thick with emotion, barely a whisper. Elias leaned forward, his gaze piercing but gentle, conveying the gravity of his words. "And that, Cora, is precisely what this company needs. That is the true value that has been lost, and that is the value I intend to restore." He then laid out his offer, a proposal that shattered her wildest dreams. "I am reorganizing the entire corporate structure. Cashin and Serafina's departments will be thoroughly overhauled, purged of their toxic influence. I need people of integrity, people with heart, to help me rebuild Thorne Industries into what it once was, and what it should be." "Cora Willow," Elias announced, a profound sense of satisfaction in his voice, a quiet triumph. "I am offering you the position of my chief of staff. You will report directly to me. You will be instrumental in reshaping our employee relations, our corporate culture, and ensuring that humanity is at the forefront of every decision. This comes with a substantial salary, a generous benefits package, and opportunities for growth you can barely imagine. You will be a key player in this new era of Thorne Industries." Cora was stunned into silence, her mind reeling. Her wildest dreams had never encompassed such a position. She thought of her struggling grandmother, her own relentless financial worries, the burden of medical bills. "Mr. Thorne, I don't know what to say. I'm just an administrative assistant. I have no executive experience." Elias smiled, a warm, paternal expression. "You are more than that, Cora. You are the embodiment of the values I built this company upon. You are the future of Thorne Industries. And as a personal gesture of my gratitude for your genuine compassion, for seeing the man behind the mop, I have arranged for the purchase of a new, comfortable home for you and your grandmother, free and clear, so you can focus on rebuilding your lives without the burden of financial stress. Consider it a down payment on the future of this company." Cora burst into tears, tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude, profound and uncontrollable. She had never dreamed such kindness existed, let alone that it would be bestowed upon her, a seemingly insignificant administrative assistant. The very acts of compassion she had shown to a nobody had inexplicably transformed her entire life, a powerful testament to the ripple effect of goodness. Months passed, and the dust from the corporate upheaval slowly settled. Thorne Industries, under Elias Thorne's direct and watchful eye, began its slow, deliberate transformation. The ruthlessly efficient, profit-at-all-costs culture that Cashin and Serafina had cultivated was systematically dismantled. Elias initiated new programs focusing on employee well-being, mentorship, fair compensation, and comprehensive support systems. Older employees, once targeted for dismissal, were now valued for their experience and institutional knowledge, many of them being offered new roles that leveraged their wisdom. The laughter and genuine camaraderie that had been stifled by fear began to return to the hallways, replacing the hushed, anxious atmosphere. Morale soared, and surprisingly, Even with the shift in focus, innovation began to thrive once more, born from a place of security and respect rather than pressure. Elias, no longer a recluse, found a renewed purpose in guiding his company back to its moral compass. He often observed Cora Willow in her new role as chief of staff, a quiet satisfaction filling him. She handled her responsibilities with grace, intelligence, and the same unwavering empathy she had shown Arthur. She advocated fiercely for employees, streamlined processes with a human touch, and brought a much-needed warmth and understanding to the executive floor. Her grandmother was settled in their beautiful new home, thriving in the security and comfort, and Cora herself radiated a quiet confidence and happiness she had never known, blossoming in an environment that now truly valued her for who she was. She was a living testament to the power of genuine decency, thriving in an environment that now valued her true worth. The irony of it all was never lost on Elias. He had built an empire based on principles of respect and human dignity, only to see it nearly crumble under the weight of greed and corporate callousness. He had returned, in disguise, to witness its decay firsthand, and in doing so, found the single, pure spark, embodied in Cora, that could reignite its soul. The experience reaffirmed his deepest belief that true strength lay not in ruthless ambition, but in the quiet power of human connection, in the simple, often overlooked acts of kindness that define true character. He would sometimes walk the halls, no longer burdened by the pretense of being Arthur, but as Elias Thorne, the revered founder, his presence inspiring respect and quiet admiration. He would occasionally pass by the very spots where he had been dismissed, ignored, or scorned as the janitor, the supply closet, the executive washroom, Cashin's former office. A faint, knowing smile would touch his lips. He had seen humanity at its most venal and at its most beautiful, all from the vantage point of invisibility. The lesson was clear, etched into the very foundation of his revitalized company. Character is rarely revealed in the bright glare of success, in the grand speeches or the soaring profits, but rather in the quiet shadows of daily life. It is in how one treats those from whom they expect nothing, those they perceive as having no power or influence, that their true nature is laid bare. And in a world that often champions the loudest and the most aggressive, it is often the quietest acts of kindness that eventually, and inevitably, receive the most profound and unexpected rewards. If this story of Elias Thorne and the ultimate corporate comeback resonated with you, you're in the right place. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you more tales of justice served, unexpected reversals of fortune, and the triumph of good over greed. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next captivating story. Now, we want to hear from you. What was the most shocking part of Elias's reveal? Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated or mistreated, only to see them rise above it? And what do you think is the most important quality a good leader should possess? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your insights and connecting with our amazing community.